going to do when we are preparing to sow seeds and transplant is to prepare the moisture level of our soil media. We use ProMix, and when you get it out of the bag, it's going to be fully dry, and we're going to wet it to where it gets to a consistency and where you should be able to hold it in a ball in your hand and then bounce it a few times without it falling apart. So we're going to get there first. Depending on the environment of the greenhouse that you're working in, the moisture of your soil is going to determine how well your seed is going to germinate. If you're in a super dry greenhouse like we're in right now, which I'm sure we're like at 100 degrees, if you're trying to start seeds in partially dry media, your soil is going to dry out before it even gets a chance to reach water, before your seed starts to reach water. But if you wet it enough, then it's going to have a nice little place to start setting its roots. You can start to see the color change, and even in the way that it sounds. And if you were going to be adding amendments to your soil media, this would be the step to do it in. While you're creating up moisture content, moisture level in your media, if you were going to be adding anything like blood meal or rock phosphate, green sand, this is the time that you would be doing it. We don't add any amendments to our initial potting mix, to our seeding mix, because we want our seedlings to start off strong. We don't want to give them additional nutrition when they're just starting to germinate. We do give them supplemental nutrition once they get about 3 or 4 weeks old, probably around the time that they get transplanted into larger containers. So this looks good. So you should be able to hold it in your hand. It'll drain a little. I'm going to make a ball, and it should hold and then fall apart. So that's good. And today we're going to start sweet alyssum seeds. And these are real tiny seeds. These are the 128 count cells right here. This is what we'll use for practically anything in the for farm production, because it takes up a small amount of space. It's very easy to count how many of each plant we're starting. As the plants get bigger, if they're not ready to be transplanted out, if they need more time in the greenhouse, they will be moved into a 50 count cell. For some transplants that have larger root structures and need more nutrients, like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, we'll start them right in the 50 count, because they'll grow too fast for the 128s. Sometimes it helps to just pick out these bigger pieces that can prevent seeds from germinating. They're too heavy. So the next thing that you're going to want to do is make holes for your seed. Depending on the size of your seed, you're going to want to make a hole that's about twice the diameter of your seed. So if you've got something like a bean or a cucurbit seed that is probably around this big, you could do a hole that's pretty deep, probably go all the way to the bottom. If you've got something like a tomato or a pepper seed, I would do just a medium-sized hole. I'd say kale and any of the other brassicas are the easiest to seed because the seed is very easy to see, and they only need to be about halfway deep. But these are real little, and I'll show you. Real little seeds. This is sweet alyssum. So we're just going to make real tiny holes, and you can use a tool for this. In the past we've used screwdrivers, or you can just use your finger. And this is going to be a very light hole, so we'll do that many. These are so little, you're not going to be able to get just one, you're going to get a couple. So drop 2 or 3 in there. So now to cover our holes, and you can see we've got our sweet alyssum in here. It's just near the top of the surface, and that'll be fine. And then there's 2 ways that you can cover your holes. If you have a deeper hole that's about this big, I'll usually take my finger and fold the soil within itself. If you've got a really shallow hole, I'll just take a small amount of soil and sprinkle it on top. Getting those big clumps out. Some seeds do prefer having light to germinate. Some types of lettuces. I don't think sweet alyssum is one of those. Okay, so that's it. And this is the 1/28. So if we were to do that in the 50 count, you would just have a larger amount of soil. You'd still do your holes just as shallowly. I would recommend doing the 50 count if you were doing like a cucurbit seed or a bean seed. Any of the bigger seeds will definitely prefer having the space of a 50 count because their roots will outgrow the cell before it even has a chance to make a stem and leaves and all of that. So this is a large regular flat. This is what most small scale farmers do. And with this one, you just fill your soil just about this way. We're going to use the sweet alyssum seeds, but say they're tomatoes. So you would make holes in here as if these don't exist. So you could do, I don't know, 4 rows of, no, you could do 10 rows of 4 each, and that would be good for your tomatoes. The downside to using these large flats is that your roots are going to start to grow into one another. So when it comes time for you to transplant, it's more likely that your transplants will encounter transplant shock, and they will delay in maturity, or they will suffer a little bit more because you're breaking up those root structures as you're separating them. And that's where these containers come to be a benefit, is because each plant is growing in its own separate container. Once the root reaches the bottom, they air prune themselves. So they just hold on tight, and then they're ready for transplant. If it's not time for them to transplant, that's where supplemental fertilizer comes in, or you can move them into a larger one of these cell packs. These are also helpful for when you're transplanting, because you're already working with the same shaped cell. It's just slightly larger. So when you're transplanting, these are paladin peppers. We're going to half fill our 50 cell count containers with soil, just a little bit on the bottom. And you'll know that your transplant is ready because you should be able to just tug on it slightly and it'll come up all on its own. It shouldn't have started to form a ball on the bottom, but the roots should be just visible, not super tight in there. And then you just drop him right in, press him down a little bit, add some more soil up to the line of the cell pack, nice and tight in there. And then he's ready to go, and he's happy. So an example of transplants that are not ready to go, these guys for example, if I were to transplant these, I would transplant them into singles because they've already gone through their rotation of being in the 50 cell count, so they need something a little bit bigger. These guys are not ready, but if I was to try to transplant them and I tried to pull him up from the bottom, you see that he's not going to come out on his own because his roots have not developed enough to hold the entire container. So if I really wanted to get him out, I'd have to like get in there and squeeze, and I can feel the roots breaking, so he's not ready to come out. So let's try this one instead. This one is okay, but you can still see if I hold it in my hand and bounce it a few times, the structure's gonna collapse. So this guy is not quite ready for transplanting. They need to be able to hold on their own. An example of transplants that have waited too long to go into other containers are these guys here. These are Selma sunflowers, Selma suns. Some are drier than others. I'd recommend that if you're transplanting to have the moisture of your cell about 50 to 75% of moisture. These guys are pretty much at 100%, and if you try to transplant these outside or into other cells, they're going to experience a lot of transplant shock. So I would wet them first. This one seems like he's more ready. This is probably around 50% moisture, and you can see that the bottom of the cell is starting to create a little ball, and the roots have nowhere to go. So if you transplant these guys, I would break up their cell structure a little bit, their root structure, and that's going to help them break out of the pattern that they're in at the bottom. I would do that, because if you try to just do it on its own, it's just going to keep creating a ball of roots. Hardening off is the process of getting a plant ready to go out into the field or into its final home. So the process of hardening off can last anywhere between a week to 3 to 4 weeks. When you've got a plant that is just about ready to go out into the field, and you can tell that it's ready because it's created its second set of true leaves. There's the first set right here, and this set emerges when the plant germinates. These ones on the bottom here, and then the true leaves are going to come out. So your transplant should have developed at least one set of true leaves, which are the leaves that are true for the variety of the plant that you're growing, the type of plant that you're growing. So these guys, I'd say, are ready to be transplanted. So you could harden these off for anywhere between 1 and 3 weeks. The process of hardening off means just putting your plants in a place where they're more exposed to a true environment of the outdoors. So they would be exposed to more wind, to fluctuations in temperature, to heavier rains, aeration and pressure of wind. So wind would actually help their stems strengthen. And that can take anywhere between 1 and 3 weeks.
To be the biggest misconception, the biggest step that seems to be the blunder that everybody takes?
I think people assume that all plants are started in the same way. And I think people forget that the strength of a mature plant and the strength of how much your plant is going to produce as far as harvestability and pounds comes from how you start it. Summer varieties, people don't really know that they need to be started on heat mats. So I think a lot of people will contribute their idea of having a black thumb to not understanding how to start a seed. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, some varieties of herbs can be really tricky if you don't have your soil temperature just right. So if you're starting those at home and you're only getting 3 seeds and you dumped a whole packet of seeds in there and you're like, oh, I'm so bad at this. It's not you. It's just because your soil temperature is not right. So you need to be using a heat mat if you can.